You can laugh at the janitor if you want, the billionaire said with a confident smile. But in 60 seconds on this mat, everyone will know why confidence matters. The employees gathered around the training area laughed politely. Some exchanged amused glances. A few lifted their phones. No one knew that before the day was over, the room would fall into a silence none of them would ever forget. The glass atrium of Sterling Dynamics shimmered beneath the morning sun. Light poured through the vaulted ceiling and spilled across polished marble floors. The company's annual leadership event had drawn executives, investors, and employees from across the country. At the center of it all stood Victoria Sterling, founder, billionaire, and one of the most respected Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners in the business world. She wore confidence as naturally as breathing. Her voice carried easily through the crowd. Her smile was sharp. Her reputation even sharper. Leadership is about control, she said, pacing slowly across the demonstration mat. Reading people, understanding pressure, knowing when someone is stronger than they appear. The audience nodded. They had heard versions of this speech before. Then her gaze drifted toward the far corner of the atrium. A man was quietly pushing a mop across the floor near a row of potted palms. He looked completely out of place among the tailored suits and luxury watches. His gray maintenance uniform was neat but worn. His name tag read, Ethan Walker. You, Victoria called out suddenly. Laughter rippled through the crowd before Ethan even looked up. He stopped mopping and turned calmly toward her. Would you help me with a demonstration? More laughter followed. Ethan glanced around the room. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him. Yet his expression never changed. I don't think that's a good idea, he replied. His voice was steady, low, almost gentle. Victoria grinned. Come on, just a friendly spar. 30 seconds. Several employees chuckled. One executive whispered something that made his table laugh louder. Ethan rested both hands on the mop handle. No thank you. The answer surprised people. Most expected nervousness. Others expected embarrassment. Instead, they saw something else. Quiet certainty. Victoria folded her arms. Afraid I might embarrass you? The crowd laughed again. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Not angry. Not offended. Simply thoughtful. The sunlight reflected against the floor between them. Somewhere above, the hum of the building's ventilation system blended with distant conversations. The moment seemed ordinary. Yet something about Ethan's eyes made a few people stop smiling. No, he said softly. I've just spent enough of my life hurting people. The laughter faded. Not completely, but enough. Victoria blinked. The answer was not what she expected. Around the atrium, a few employees exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan lowered his gaze and returned to his work. The mop glided across the marble floor in slow, even strokes. As if nothing had happened. As if standing in front of a billionaire and an audience of hundreds meant absolutely nothing to him. Victoria watched him for several seconds. For the first time that morning, she wasn't smiling. Because there was something unusual about the man everyone overlooked. Something disciplined. Something hidden. And deep down, though she couldn't explain why, Victoria Sterling suddenly found herself wondering a question that would change both of their lives. Who exactly was Ethan Walker? Ethan Walker woke at 4:45 every morning without an alarm. Some habits stayed with a man long after the uniform was gone. The small house he rented sat on a quiet street outside Denver, Colorado, where the porch boards creaked in the cold and the mailbox leaned slightly to one side. It was not much, but it was home. He moved quietly through the kitchen, starting a pot of coffee while the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The house was still, peaceful. For a few minutes, it belonged only to him. Then he heard familiar footsteps padding down the hallway. Dad, a sleepy voice called. Ethan smiled before he even turned around. Morning, sophomore. Sophie Walker appeared wearing oversized pajamas and carrying a stuffed rabbit that had survived nearly 10 years of adventures. Her blonde hair was a mess. Her eyes were barely open. Ethan poured a glass of orange juice and slid it across the table. Big math test today? Sophie nodded dramatically. I think math should be illegal. Ethan laughed softly. I will write Congress after breakfast. Sophie grinned. It was a small moment. One of thousands. But those moments were what mattered most to Ethan now. The morning moved with familiar rhythm. Pancakes on a chipped blue plate. A backpack by the door. A quick check for homework. By 6:30, they were driving through quiet neighborhoods in Ethan's aging pickup truck. The heater rattled. Country music played softly through worn speakers. Sophie talked about school projects, favorite teachers, and a stray dog someone had spotted near the playground. Ethan listened to every word. When they reached the school entrance, Sophie unbuckled her seat belt and paused. "Dad, yeah. You are coming to career day next month, right?" Ethan looked at her. Would not miss it. Her smile brightened instantly. Good. She leaned over and hugged him before jumping out of the truck. Ethan watched her disappear through the school doors before driving toward downtown. The city was waking up now. Traffic thickened. Office towers reflected the morning sun. An hour later, he parked behind Sterling Dynamics and changed into his maintenance uniform. Most employees never noticed him. Some nodded politely. Others walked past without looking up from their phones. Ethan never seemed bothered by it. He fixed broken chairs, repaired loose door handles, cleaned conference rooms after meetings. If someone thanked him, he smiled. If they did not, he smiled anyway. There was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. Not pride, not resignation, just acceptance. Late that afternoon, he was replacing a ceiling panel near one of the executive hallways when two employees passed beneath him. "Did you see Victoria's face earlier?" one whispered. "She cannot stop talking about that janitor." The other laughed. "Maybe she is trying to figure out why he turned her down." Their voices faded down the corridor. Ethan returned to his work without reaction. Yet several floors above, inside an office overlooking the city skyline, Victoria Sterling stood beside a wall of glass staring toward the maintenance level below. The reports on her desk remained untouched. The emails waited unanswered. Because despite everything she had accomplished, despite every deal she had closed and every challenge she had conquered, she could not stop thinking about one simple sentence spoken by a man holding a mop. And for the first time in years, Victoria Sterling found herself curious about someone who seemed determined to remain invisible. 3 days passed, and Victoria Sterling discovered something she did not like. She could not stop thinking about Ethan Walker. It annoyed her. She had built a company worth billions of dollars. She negotiated international contracts before breakfast. She managed thousands of employees across multiple states. Yet somehow, the quiet maintenance worker who barely spoke had occupied more space in her thoughts than any board meeting that week. On Thursday morning, she stood inside a conference room overlooking downtown Denver. Executives filled the long walnut table. Charts glowed on oversized screens. Revenue forecasts were discussed. Expansion plans were debated. Victoria usually noticed everything. Every hesitation, every weakness, every opportunity. But halfway through a presentation, her attention drifted toward the glass wall. Far below, on the lobby level, she spotted Ethan replacing a decorative light fixture. "Victoria," one executive asked. She blinked. "Sorry. Continue." The meeting resumed, but her curiosity only grew stronger. Later that afternoon, she called her executive assistant into her office. "Tell me about Ethan Walker." Her assistant looked surprised. "The maintenance employee?" "Yes. There is not much to tell. He has worked here a little over 3 years. Perfect attendance. No complaints. No disciplinary reports." Victoria leaned back. "That is all. That is all." The answer should have satisfied her. It did not. That evening, long after most employees had gone home, Victoria remained in her office reviewing contracts. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. Rain tapped softly against the glass. As she gathered her things to leave, she noticed movement in the parking garage below. Ethan was walking toward his pickup truck carrying a small backpack. Something made her pause. Across the lot, an elderly security guard struggled with a cart loaded with equipment. One wheel had become stuck against a concrete seam. Ethan immediately changed direction. He set down his backpack and helped without being asked. The two men spoke for several minutes. Then Ethan shook the guard's hand, picked up his bag, and drove away. No audience. No recognition. No reason to do it except kindness. Victoria watched until the truck disappeared onto the street. The next morning brought another surprise. She entered the employee cafeteria earlier than usual and noticed Ethan sitting alone near the window eating breakfast. Most people barely acknowledged him. Yet as employees passed his table, something unusual happened. A receptionist stopped to thank him for repairing her office chair. A young accountant thanked him for helping jumpstart her car battery during a snowstorm the previous winter. A janitorial contractor greeted him by name and asked about his daughter. Ethan listened to each person with genuine attention, never rushing, never acting important. By the time Victoria reached the coffee station, she realized something she had never noticed before. People trusted him, not because of status, not because of money, because of character. That afternoon, another small mystery appeared. While touring a newly renovated floor with architects and department managers, Victoria noticed a loose metal display frame beginning to tilt near a busy hallway. Before anyone else reacted, Ethan crossed the corridor and steadied it with one hand. His movement was so quick and controlled that several people stopped talking. It lasted only a second, yet something about it felt unusual. The balance, the awareness, the precision. Ethan simply adjusted the frame and continued walking, as though nothing had happened. Victoria watched him disappear around the corner. A strange feeling settled over her. It was not attraction. Not yet. It was recognition. The growing sense that the story everyone believed about Ethan Walker was incomplete. And somewhere beneath the quiet smile, the worn uniform, and the humble routine, a much larger story was waiting to be discovered. The questions began quietly. Then they multiplied. Victoria Sterling had built her career on reading people. Investors, competitors, partners. She could usually understand someone within minutes. Ethan Walker was becoming the first exception she could remember. The following week, she found herself noticing details she would have ignored before. One Tuesday morning, she stepped into an elevator with 3 department managers discussing a major software rollout. The conversation stalled when Ethan entered carrying a toolbox. Nobody expected him to speak. Nobody expected him to listen. Yet halfway through the discussion, one manager frowned at a scheduling conflict displayed on a tablet screen. "That timeline does not make sense," he muttered. Ethan glanced briefly at the chart. "The issue is not the timeline." The managers looked at him. "It is the supplier sequence," Ethan said calmly. "You are scheduling phase 3 before phase 2 inventory arrives." Silence followed. The manager blinked and reviewed the screen again. A few seconds later, his eyes widened. "He is right." Ethan simply nodded and stepped off at the next floor. The elevator doors closed. Victoria stood motionless. "Does he have a business degree?" one manager asked. Nobody knew. 2 days later, another strange moment occurred. A severe thunderstorm rolled across Denver shortly before closing time. Wind rattled the windows. Rain hammered against the glass exterior of the building. Employees hurried toward parking garages and rideshares. Near the main entrance, a young intern slipped while carrying several boxes of presentation materials. Papers scattered across the floor. Before anyone else moved, Ethan was already there. He helped gather every sheet, reorganized the materials, and carried the boxes to her vehicle. "Thank you," the intern said. "I would have been here all night." Ethan smiled. Everybody needs help sometimes. Then he walked back into the rain without waiting for another word. Victoria happened to witness the entire exchange from the lobby. Balcony above. Again, there was no audience. No reward. No reason. Just quiet kindness. But it was Friday afternoon that truly changed everything. The company hosted a networking event for executives, investors, and community leaders. Soft jazz floated through the ballroom. Crystal glasses reflected warm golden light. Conversations blended into a steady hum of success and ambition. Victoria circulated through the crowd greeting guests when she noticed Ethan near the rear entrance adjusting a display stand. A retired Air Force colonel attending the event stopped abruptly upon seeing him. The older man stared for several seconds. "Excuse me," he said. Ethan looked up. For the first time since Victoria had known him, she saw genuine surprise cross his face. "Colonel Harris." The elderly man laughed softly. "I cannot believe it." He extended his hand. "It has been years." Ethan shook it politely. "Good to see you, sir." Before Victoria could move closer, another guest interrupted the colonel and pulled him away. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet she noticed something important. The colonel had not greeted Ethan like a maintenance worker. He had greeted him like a respected equal. Later that evening, Victoria searched public records she normally never would have touched. She found employment history, residence information, basic records. Nothing extraordinary. Almost as if someone had carefully erased every interesting chapter from Ethan Walker's life. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the city lights beyond her office window. The mystery no longer felt accidental. It felt deliberate. Someone who had once mattered had chosen to disappear. Someone with knowledge, discipline, and unusual respect for military figures had somehow become a man who spent his days repairing light fixtures and cleaning hallways. And for reasons she could not explain, Victoria became more determined than ever to uncover the truth. By the beginning of spring, Victoria Sterling had stopped pretending her curiosity was temporary. Every answer she found about Ethan Walker only created 3 new questions. He never volunteered information. He never spoke about his past. He never tried to impress anyone. Yet somehow, the less he revealed, the more impossible it became to ignore him. One Monday morning, Victoria stood before a planning committee discussing the company's largest charity event of the year. Sterling Dynamics sponsored veterans education programs, youth mentorship initiatives, and community outreach projects across Colorado. This year, the event would be larger than ever. Local media would attend. Corporate sponsors would participate. Hundreds of guests were expected. "We need something memorable," one executive said. "Something people will talk about." Another nodded. "Maybe a leadership challenge. Something interactive." Victoria listened quietly. Then an idea began forming. By the end of the meeting, the event had a new centerpiece. A charity Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu exhibition designed to raise scholarship funds for military families. Employees could volunteer. Local athletes could participate. Donations would be tied to exhibition matches and demonstrations. The committee loved it immediately. Victoria smiled politely. Only she knew another reason the idea appealed to her. 2 days later, flyers appeared throughout the company. Registration opened. Excitement spread quickly. Employees discussed the upcoming event during lunch breaks and hallway conversations. Meanwhile, Ethan carried on exactly as before. If he noticed the buzz, he never showed it. One afternoon, Victoria found him replacing a damaged handrail near the east stairwell. Sunlight streamed through nearby windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. "Ethan." He looked up. "Ms. Sterling, you have heard about the charity event?" "A little. I think you should participate." Ethan returned his attention to the handrail. "I do not think I would be much help." Victoria folded her arms. "You might surprise yourself." A faint smile touched his face. "I doubt that. You are declining before I even explain." "I am declining because I know myself." The answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, it deepened the mystery. Victoria studied him carefully. "Why do I get the feeling there is a story behind that answer?" Ethan tightened the final bolt and stood. For a moment, he seemed older than his years. Not tired, just carrying memories nobody else could see. Some stories belong in the past. Then he picked up his tools and walked away. The words lingered long after he disappeared around the corner. A week later, registration closed. Nearly every available exhibition slot had been filled. During a final planning session, one coordinator frowned at a spreadsheet. "We have one problem." "What is it?" Victoria asked. "The featured exhibition match." "What about it?" "The local athlete scheduled for the finale withdrew this morning because of an injury." The room fell quiet. Sponsors had already advertised the event. The final exhibition was supposed to be the highlight. "We need a replacement," someone said. Several names were suggested. None generated enthusiasm. Then one executive laughed. "Why not ask the maintenance guy? The one you challenged a few weeks ago." The room chuckled. Victoria did not laugh. Instead, she looked down at the schedule. Slowly, thoughtfully. Then she surprised everyone. "Actually," she said, "that might not be a bad idea." The room grew still. By the following morning, an official invitation had been delivered to Ethan Walker. Not a joke, not a casual suggestion. A formal request from the company itself. And for the first time since Victoria Sterling had met him, Ethan sat silently at his kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper he could not simply ignore. Ethan Walker stared at the invitation long after Sophie had gone to bed. The paper sat on the kitchen table beneath a single overhead light. Outside, a cool Colorado breeze rattled the branches of the maple tree near the porch. Inside, the house was silent except for the ticking of an old wall clock. The invitation was simple. Participate in the charity exhibition. Help raise scholarship funds for military families. Featured event. Public appearance. Ethan read the words several times. None of them bothered him. It was the attention that bothered him. For years, he had carefully built a life that asked for nothing from anyone. A quiet job. A small house. Time with his daughter. Peace. Yet somehow that peace now felt fragile. The next morning, he drove Sophie to school as usual. She noticed the envelope resting on the passenger seat. "What is that?" she asked. Ethan glanced at it. An invitation. For something fun? A faint smile crossed his face. "I am not sure yet." Sophie studied him for a moment. "You should go." Ethan laughed softly. "You do not even know what it is." "Maybe," she said. "But every time you think too much about something, it usually means you already know the answer." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "You sound older than 10. Sophie grinned. "That is because I am almost 11. The conversation stayed with him long after she disappeared into the school building. 3 days later, the charity event arrived. Sterling Dynamics transformed its largest conference center into a celebration of community and service. Banners lined the walls. Veterans organizations hosted information booths. Scholarship recipients shared stories on stage. Families filled the auditorium. Laughter echoed through the hallways. The atmosphere felt warm and hopeful. By early afternoon, the main exhibition area was packed. Employees, investors, community leaders, and guests filled hundreds of seats surrounding a large demonstration mat. Cameras had been positioned throughout the venue. Victoria Sterling stood near the center speaking with sponsors. She looked composed as always, yet beneath the confidence was something unfamiliar. Anticipation. Every few minutes her eyes drifted toward the entrance. At 2 o'clock the scheduled exhibitions began. Participants demonstrated techniques. Athletes shared stories about discipline and perseverance. Donations steadily increased. Yet as the afternoon progressed, one question spread through the audience. Would Ethan Walker actually appear? Several employees doubted it. "He is not coming," one whispered. "I would not blame him." Another nodded. "Too much attention." Victoria heard the comments, but said nothing. Secretly, she wondered the same thing. Then, 20 minutes before the featured exhibition, movement near the entrance caught her attention. Conversations began to fade. Heads slowly turned. Ethan Walker had arrived. He wore a simple navy polo shirt and khaki pants. Nothing dramatic. Nothing designed to attract attention. Yet somehow the room noticed him immediately. He walked with the same calm confidence he carried every day. No rush. No nerves. No performance. Victoria felt an unexpected sense of relief. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room. She approached him. "You came." Ethan nodded. "The scholarships matter. You could still change your mind." A faint smile touched his face. "I know." Around them, the noise of the event continued. Applause rose from a nearby stage. Children laughed near the family section. Somewhere a photographer adjusted camera equipment. Everything felt normal. Yet beneath the surface, a strange tension had begun to settle over the room. Because nobody knew exactly what was about to happen. And as Ethan Walker quietly took his place near the edge of the mat, even Victoria Sterling realized she was no longer hoping to impress him. She was hoping to finally understand him. The final exhibition was announced just after 3 o'clock. Conversations softened. Hundreds of guests shifted their attention toward the center of the room. Bright overhead lights reflected across the demonstration mat, while cameras quietly adjusted their focus. Victoria Sterling stepped forward first. Applause filled the conference center. She thanked the sponsors, the veterans organizations, the volunteers, and the families whose lives would benefit from the scholarship fund. Then she turned toward Ethan. The applause became more uncertain. Curious. Many people still knew him only as the maintenance employee from the hallways. Ethan walked onto the mat with the same calm expression he carried every day. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to impress anyone. The contrast between them could not have been greater. Victoria stood at the center of attention, confident and accomplished. Ethan stood quietly beside her, looking more like a father attending a school event than someone participating in the featured attraction of the afternoon. The exhibition began. Victoria moved first, demonstrating technique and control with the ease of someone who had trained for years. The audience nodded appreciatively. Several guests recorded videos on their phones. Ethan responded with simple movements. Nothing flashy. Nothing dramatic. Again and again he avoided becoming the center of attention. Yet something strange happened. The longer the demonstration continued, the quieter the audience became. Victoria noticed it first. Ethan never seemed rushed. Never surprised. Never off balance. Every movement looked effortless. Almost familiar. Like someone revisiting a language he had not spoken in years. She increased the pace slightly. Ethan adjusted. She changed direction. Ethan adjusted again. The exhibition remained completely respectful and controlled, exactly as intended. Yet an unusual feeling began spreading through the room. Confusion. Not because of what Ethan was doing, because of how naturally he was doing it. Victoria stepped back for a moment. She studied him carefully. The audience did the same. For the first time all afternoon, nobody was talking. Then a voice suddenly rose from the front row. That cannot be possible. Heads turned. An elderly man stood slowly from his seat. His silver hair caught the overhead lights. Several military veterans nearby immediately recognized him. General Robert Callahan, retired four-star officer, decorated national military leader. The room fell completely silent. General Callahan stared at Ethan as though he had just seen a ghost. "Ethan Walker?" he asked. Ethan froze. For a brief second, the years seemed to disappear from his face. "Hello, General." A murmur swept across the audience. Victoria looked between them in disbelief. The general stepped closer to the edge of the mat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Nobody answered. Nobody moved. General Callahan smiled softly. 15 years ago, Ethan Walker trained some of the most respected military instructors in the country. Not because he wanted recognition. Not because he wanted promotion. Because he believed excellence was a responsibility. Complete silence filled the conference center. Cameras lowered. Phones stopped recording. Even the children seemed to sense something important was happening. The general continued. "I have met senators, CEOs, decorated officers, and world leaders. Yet very few people earned the respect Ethan Walker earned." Victoria felt her heart sink. Every unanswered question suddenly seemed much larger than she imagined. Ethan lowered his eyes. He looked uncomfortable, almost wishing the moment would end. That reaction told Victoria more than any speech ever could. Because a man hungry for recognition would have enjoyed the attention. Ethan clearly did not. The general smiled warmly. The remarkable thing is not what he accomplished. It is that he never felt the need to tell anyone. And in that moment, surrounded by hundreds of stunned witnesses, the mystery Victoria Sterling had chased for weeks finally began to reveal itself. For several seconds after General Callahan finished speaking, nobody said a word. The enormous conference center that had buzzed with conversation all afternoon now felt almost sacred in its stillness. Victoria Sterling looked around the room and saw the same expression everywhere. Surprise, respect, disbelief. Yet the person who seemed most uncomfortable with the attention was Ethan himself. He stood quietly near the edge of the mat, his hands folded loosely in front of him. He was not smiling. He was not proud. He simply looked like a man waiting for the spotlight to move on. General Callahan stepped closer and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You disappeared," he said softly. Ethan nodded. "I had other priorities." The general smiled knowingly. "Your daughter." Ethan's expression changed instantly. The room noticed it. The walls he carried around his past seemed to lower whenever Sophie was mentioned. "Yes," he replied. "My daughter." The general turned toward the audience. Many years ago, Ethan could have accepted positions most people spend a lifetime chasing. He could have traveled the world. He could have built an extraordinary public career. Instead, he chose something else. He paused. He chose to be present for the person who needed him most. Victoria felt a lump rise in her throat. She thought about the morning she had seen Ethan arrive before sunrise. The quiet lunches, the repaired chairs, the small acts of kindness nobody noticed. Suddenly all of it looked different. The audience began applauding, slowly at first, then louder. Ethan lowered his head slightly, clearly wishing the attention would end. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. When it finally faded, the event organizers gently moved the program forward. Guests returned to conversations. Sponsors resumed meetings. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. Throughout the remainder of the afternoon, people approached Ethan one after another. Veterans thanked him. Employees shook his hand. Scholarship recipients expressed gratitude. Ethan treated each person exactly the same. No speeches, no stories, just quiet kindness. Victoria watched from a distance. The more she observed him, the more one realization became impossible to ignore. The thing that impressed her most was not his hidden accomplishments. It was the fact that he never used them to elevate himself. As the event wound down and the crowd slowly dispersed, Victoria found Ethan sitting alone near an empty section of the conference center. The sunlight outside had begun turning gold, casting long evening shadows across the floor. "May I sit?" she asked. Ethan nodded. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, honest. Finally, Victoria looked at him. "You could have told people." Ethan smiled faintly. "Why?" "Because what you accomplished matters." He considered that for a second. "Maybe." Then he glanced toward the window. "But what matters more is who I am now." Victoria followed his gaze. Families were leaving the building. Children laughed near the parking lot. Volunteers packed equipment into trucks. Ordinary moments. Beautiful moments. Ethan watched them with quiet appreciation. "People spend so much time trying to become somebody," he said softly. "Sometimes they forget they already are." Victoria sat very still. For the first time in a long time, she had no clever response. No business insight. No strategic observation. Just respect. Deep, genuine respect. And somewhere inside her heart, something she had not expected was beginning to grow. Not because Ethan Walker had impressed an audience, but because he had spent years choosing character over recognition and somehow remained kind enough to do it again tomorrow. The weeks that followed brought changes nobody expected. Not dramatic changes. Not the kind that make headlines. The quiet kind. The kind that slowly reshape a life. At Sterling Dynamics, employees still saw Ethan Walker in the hallways carrying tools, repairing fixtures, and helping wherever he was needed. The difference was in how they looked at him now. Conversations stopped when he entered a room, not out of awkwardness, but respect. Executives greeted him by name. Veterans sought him out for advice. Younger employees listened when he spoke. Yet none of it changed Ethan. Every morning, he still arrived early. Every afternoon, he still worked with the same patience and care. If anything, he seemed relieved when people eventually returned to treating him like an ordinary person. One Saturday morning, nearly a month after the charity event, Sophie sat at the kitchen table finishing a science project when a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Ethan glanced through the window. "Are we expecting company?" Sophie asked. "I do not think so." A few moments later, a knock sounded at the front door. Ethan opened it and found Victoria Sterling standing on the porch holding a small cardboard box. For a second, neither spoke. Then Victoria smiled. "I brought supplies for a 5th-grade volcano project." Sophie immediately appeared behind her father. "You know about the volcano project?" Victoria laughed. "Your father mentioned it." Sophie looked delighted. "Come in." Ethan shook his head with quiet amusement as Victoria entered the house. The billionaire who commanded boardrooms worth billions of dollars spent the next hour helping measure baking soda and paint cardboard mountains. There were no cameras, no publicity, no business agenda, just laughter, spilled paint, and a surprisingly competitive debate about the proper shape of a volcano. As the afternoon sunlight filled the kitchen, Ethan watched Sophie smile more than she had in weeks. Something warm settled in his chest. Later, after the project was finished and Sophie disappeared to call a friend, Victoria and Ethan sat on the back porch. The evening air smelled faintly of pine trees and fresh grass. Somewhere down the street, children played basketball. The world felt simple, peaceful. "I have been thinking about something," Victoria said. Ethan looked at her. "That sounds dangerous." She laughed softly. "Maybe." Then her expression grew thoughtful. "For years I believed success meant becoming impossible to ignore." Ethan listened quietly. "Then I met someone who spent years trying not to be noticed." He smiled. "How did that work out?" Victoria looked toward the fading sunset. "Not very well. People noticed anyway." For a moment neither spoke. The sky turned gold, then orange. Long shadows stretched across the neighborhood. Finally Victoria said something she had wanted to say for a long time. "You changed the way I think about success." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, you changed it yourself." She smiled. Maybe he was right. Maybe growth always came from within. But she knew one thing for certain. Meeting Ethan Walker had reminded her of something she almost forgot. Character mattered more than status. Kindness mattered more than recognition. And the strongest people were often the ones who never felt the need to prove it. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Sophie burst through the back door holding her completed volcano. "Look at this," she announced proudly. Ethan and Victoria laughed together. The sound carried into the evening air. And in that ordinary moment, surrounded by nothing more than friendship, respect, and second chances, the real victory finally became clear. It had never been about a demonstration mat, a hidden past, or a room full of stunned people. It was about a man who chose dignity over attention, a woman who learned to recognize true strength, and a little girl who reminded them both what mattered most. Sometimes the loudest lesson arrives quietly, and sometimes the people who change the world are the ones who never asked to be seen.